Hey guys, we're going to read another tall tale today. Alright, before we do, let's review the characteristics of a tall tale. We're going to play the stand up, sit down game. Alright, in this game, if I say something that is part of a tall tale or characteristic of a tall tale, you will stand up. If it is not a characteristic of a tall tale, you will sit back down. Alright, so let's play. Alright, a tall tale has a setting usually in the American frontier. Alright, you should be standing. Tall tales are fiction. That means the story is make-believe, even though the people may be real. You should still be standing. Tall tales often have characters in royal families. You should be sitting. That's a fairy tale. Right? Tall tales are humorous or funny. You should be standing. Tall tales end with words like, and they lived happily ever after. Or you should be sitting down. That's a fairy tale. Tall tales often include exaggeration. Yes, they do. You should be standing up. Okay, now, the main character of our tall tale yesterday was John Henry. And John Henry had a new job in the American frontier that we had not heard about before. He worked on the railroad. He actually worked on going through and building the tunnels to lay tracks for the railroad. Remember, the railroad was a faster way of moving from place to place. Well, the new tall tale character has something in common with John Henry. He does work on the railroad, but he has a different job than John Henry. All right, John Henry was all about competing against a steam drill. All right, you notice this train has some steam as well. The steam train, and this fella is the conductor. He is the one who drives the train. All right, in the 1800s, many Americans traveled from the East Coast out to the West to settle the American frontier. All right. The tunnels were built by people like John Henry. People rode on the trains to get from place to place. They also used trains to ship goods from one place to another. It was faster. People rode on trains to get from one place to another. All right, this man is known as Casey Jones. All right, he was a train engineer. He drove a locomotive. Can you say locomotive? All right, this is a locomotive. It's a steam train. All right, he drove for the Illinois Central Railroad more than 100 years ago. All right, his real name was John Luther Jones. He was from Casey, Kentucky. So he got the nickname Casey Jones. Casey Jones became well known for his bravery and determination. So there was a real person, and then they wrote a tall tale with exaggerations about this real person. So the tall tale itself is make-believe. So let's read the make-believe tall tale of Casey Jones. Now gather round, friends. I want to tell you a story. It's a story of a legendary engineer. Now, a legend is a well-known person. So legendary is someone who's famous. His name, it was Casey Jones. And there's never been a man that could drive a train as fast or as well. People say that Casey Jones could drive a train before he could walk. And when he was a baby, he said, choo-choo, instead of goo-goo. You think he could really drive a train before he could walk? What does that sound like to you? Sounds like exaggeration to me. All right, so here he is. He's driving that train, that locomotive. Casey was an engineer for the Illinois Central Railroad. He loved to sit way up in the cabin of the train with one hand on the whistle and one hand on the brake. When the tracks were straight and clear, Casey would pull on the throttle and the train would take off like a rocket shooting into space. When he came into the station, he would pull on the brake and bring the train to a sudden stop. Casey loved to watch the trees and fields go whizzing by as he zoomed through the countryside. He loved to make the train's whistle blow, and there was no other engineer who could blow the whistle quite like the way Casey did. Casey's whistle started out soft like a whippoorwill. A whippoorwill is a type of bird. Then it would raise up to a howl like a coyote crying in the night. Finally, it way got down a little quieter like a whisper. People in town always knew when Casey was coming. Even before they could see his train, they could hear it. They'd hear the powerful chugga, 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 chugga getting louder and louder. Then they'd hear that wild whistle sound. Some said that Casey's whistle had magical powers. They said that when Casey blew his whistle, little babies would wake up from their naps. But they wouldn't cry. Instead, they'd make little chugga chugga woo woo sounds. Then they'd fall right back to sleep. When Casey blew his whistle, the cows would give an extra quart of milk. And the chickens would lay at least a dozen eggs each. And as the story goes, if you cracked one of those eggs in a cold frying pan and put a piece of plain bread out just as soon as Casey went blazing by, there in that frying pan would be a nicely fried egg, over easy, and on the side, a plate of hot buttered toast. Now, do you really think all that could happen? That's a lot of exaggeration, right? Now, the reason Casey drove so fast was simple. He took great pride in always being on time. Casey wanted to make sure that when he got that train where it was going, it was supposed to be there, no matter what. Whenever he started out on a run, the railroad men would wave and yell, "Bring her on in, Casey!" And they knew he would. All right. So Casey is always going to be where? On time. Casey is not going to be late. All right, so look at the picture. When Casey comes by, those cows are going to give extra milk, he says. May have scared the farmer, but I bet the farmer would be happy if he got some extra milk and extra eggs, wouldn't he? But Casey couldn't make that train go fast with his good looks. No, Casey needed a good fireman to help him. And he had one of the best to help him. Sim Webb. The fireman on a train didn't put out fires like you might think. Does he look like he's putting out the fire? He's shoveling coal inside. What's he doing? He's keeping the fire going. A fireman's job was to keep the fire in the engine burning by shoveling coal into it. When the flames were a-roaring, that made a lot of steam, and that made the train go. So remember, we learned in John Henry that steam in the steam drill made it go. So steam in this steam train, this locomotive, makes it go. No doubt about it, Sim Webb was a first-rate fireman. He could shovel coal faster than anyone on either side of the Mississippi. The faster Sim shoveled, the faster Casey could drive the train. Sim Webb kept the fire good and hot, and Casey got their trains in on time. Together, the team was unbeatable. There was only one day that Sim and Casey almost didn't make it to the station on time. They were carrying a load of mail to Memphis, Tennessee, and it was raining cats and dogs. What does it mean to be raining cats and dogs? Do cats and dogs fall from the sky? No, it means it's really raining hard, right? The rain had been falling for 5 or 6 weeks. And the railroad track was like the bed of a creek. At the station in Memphis, the railroad men waited for Casey to arrive. Some said, "There's no way he can make it in on time with all this rain. He'll have to slow down." But others said, "You just wait. He'll make it. Casey Jones always makes it on time." And sure enough, just then they saw a light on the tracks up ahead and heard the lonesome whistle that could only be Casey Jones. The train pulled into the station, dripping wet and puffing hard. But right on time, Casey and Sim were dog tired and more than ready for a good night's sleep. But they'd hardly settled into their beds when there was a knock at the door. Word came that the engineer who was supposed to drive the train on the southbound run was sick. All right, so what does it mean to be dog tired? If you're dog tired, you are so give out you can't stand it. The only thing you can do when you're that tired is to go to sleep. But can they go to sleep? No, someone's called in sick, so they've got to go back to work. They're so tired, but they've got to go back. Well, they didn't even have to ask Casey if he would take the man's place. Tired as he was, Casey got dressed and headed for the station. And when he got there, he found Sim Webb already stoking the fire with coal, getting the train ready to carry mail, packages of freight, and passengers as well. Passengers are people. Now, friends, here's where I have to tell you the sad part of this story about how Casey met his end. As Casey mounted or climbed into the cabin and took the throttle in his hand, he heard someone shout, "Casey, you're already more than an hour and a half late." But Casey just smiled and thought to himself, "I guess that means I'll have to go a little faster." You think it's a good idea to go a little faster? He's already tired, and he's behind, so he thinks he's going to speed. Is that a good idea? No, it's not. Casey opened up the throttle, and the train plunged into the darkness. Into the wet night. Sim Webb shoveled the coal with all his might, and the train chugged on faster and faster. "Casey," Sim yelled, "you're running too fast." But Casey said, "Fireman, don't you fret. Keep knocking at the door. And don't give up yet. I'm going to run this train until she leaves the rail." or we make it on time with the southbound mail. They drove on. The train gained speed until it was flying faster than the speed of light. Can you fly as fast as the speed of light? That's another exaggeration. Then Casey said, I believe we'll make it through, for the engine is a-steaming better than I ever knew. Casey got the signal that the tracks were clear up ahead, so he was rolling down the tracks, pushing that train just as fast as it would go. He was going so fast that it looked like he would even make it on time. Just then, as they squealed around a curve through the darkness, Casey saw a light up ahead. He knew a light wasn't supposed to be there, not on this track. I wonder what the light's from. Uh-oh. Fire's giving it all away. At that moment, Casey knew there was a broken down freight train stuck on the track just ahead, and he was speeding straight toward it. Casey pulled the brake as hard as he could and yelled to his partner, "Jump, Sim!" "Casey, you come on," replied Sim. "Jump!" Casey shouted, and in the blink of an eye, Sim jumped. But Casey stayed on the train. He knew that he could not stop the train in time, but he knew that he could slow it down. He knew that if he jumped and let go of the brake, his train would crash into the other train at a dangerously high speed. All right, why would it be bad if he hit the other train at a very, very high speed? Yeah, whoever's on the other train is going to get hurt. And what about the passengers on the train with him? Yeah, they could get hurt. So there's passengers on the back of his train as well. So he's wanting to slow it down some more, but he had Sim to jump because he's in the front where it's dangerous to hit. So Casey pulled on the brake with all his might. A terrible screeching, squealing sound ripped through the darkness. Then came the crash. The trains, they met in the middle of a hill, in a head-on tangle that was bound to spill. He tried to do his duty, the men all said, but Casey Jones, he ended up dead. Poor Casey, when they found him, they said he's had one hand still on the brake and one hand tight on the whistle, trying to stop his train as best he could and give warning to the other train. Casey Jones didn't survive that fateful ride, but he was the only person who died in the crash. Casey's bravery that night saved all of the passengers on both trains and his fireman, Sim. After that, thanks to Sim Webb keeping the story alive, people would tell stories about the brave engineer named Casey Jones. They even made up songs about him. You've already heard some part of those songs here. Here's another part. Casey Jones mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, throttle in his hand. Casey Jones mounted to the cabin. Took a trip to the promised land. They say that if you look up in the sky on a clear night and see a flash of light across the sky, well, that might be a shooting star. But then again, it might be Casey Jones roaring across the sky, chugga-chugga-chugging on time till the end of time. Do you really think this happens? This is another example of exaggeration. All right. Now, Who were our characters in this tall tale? All right, our main character was Casey Jones, and who else was a pretty big character? Sim Webb. All right, who was considered the legendary character? That's Casey Jones. All right, what was something that was an exaggeration about Casey Jones as a baby? What did they say he could do before he could walk? Drive a train. All right, and his first words were not goo goo, it was chugga chugga, choo choo. Okay. He was known for not being late, always being on time, even if he had to drive fast, and that's what caused him some trouble. Okay, now today you are going to pick an example of exaggeration again. It's just like your other ones. It says Casey Jones, the brave engineer. You will type one example of exaggeration, and if you choose to draw a picture, you can draw it, take a picture of it, and insert it, but you don't have to. Okay, and then on Monday you will review the two tall tale characters, John Henry and Casey Jones, and you'll take your last tall tale test over those two characters.